Some civilizations leave behind monuments. Humanity left behind a song. The signal should not have existed. Every chart in the galactic archive marked the sole frontier as silent for more than 3 centuries. Its colonies abandoned after the long drift scattered entire trade routes across the stars. Yet as Serenia guided her survey vessel through the pale debris field surrounding an aging relay station, a faint pulse slipped through the static like a heartbeat refusing to surrender. It was not quantum. It was not encrypted. It was astonishingly primitive. An analog broadcast. The soft crackle drifted through her cockpit speakers, followed by music unlike anything preserved in the cultural vaults of the Concorde. There were no ceremonial drums announcing conquest, no harmonic frequencies designed to synchronize neural thought, no mathematically perfect chorus praising emperors or celestial law. Instead, a warm human voice floated gently through the endless darkness, accompanied by strings and a piano weathered by time itself. The melody was imperfect. It rose. It stumbled. It breathed. Serenia lowered her hand from the navigation controls without realizing it. Her people measured history through equations carved into crystalline memory towers that could survive 1,000,000 years. Music had always been classified as entertainment, pleasant but disposable. No civilization would preserve something so fragile unless it carried extraordinary meaning. She narrowed her luminous amber eyes as the signal repeated, weakened by distance yet stubborn enough to cross the vacuum. The translator identified fragments of an ancient Earth language, but failed to reconstruct complete sentences. That alone unsettled her. Human records described astonishing engineers, fearless explorers, and relentless survivors. Yet almost every surviving document emphasized their technology or their conflicts. None had prepared her for this quiet melody echoing through a forgotten corner of space. Serenia adjusted the vessel's scanners until the broadcast pointed toward a small moon drifting around the frozen remains of an abandoned colony world. The settlement below appeared untouched for centuries. Long streets rested beneath silver dust. Tower windows reflected distant starlight, without a single living silhouette behind them. Docking beacons slept beneath layers of ice. Nothing moved except loose antenna cables swaying in the thin wind. Even from orbit, the place felt less like ruins and more like someone had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. Her shuttle descended through a pale gray sky, landing beside a weather station whose faded English lettering had almost disappeared beneath time. The air outside measured 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Frost clung to rusted railings. Every footstep echoed across empty concrete as though the colony itself was listening. The music grew stronger with every careful step. She followed it through an open maintenance corridor lined with forgotten tools, family photographs sealed beneath cracked glass, and children's drawings still attached to a bulletin board with tiny magnets that somehow refused to fall. None of it resembled a battlefield. It resembled a life interrupted. Finally, she entered a narrow communications room. Dust shimmered inside beams of weak afternoon sunlight, filtering through fractured windows. On a steel desk rested an old human radio no larger than a lunchbox, its scratched casing worn smooth by countless hands. A small amber light still glowed beside a mechanical dial. Against every law of probability, it was alive. Serenia knelt before the ancient machine in complete silence. The song continued, soft and unwavering, filling the abandoned room with impossible warmth. She placed her fingertips gently against the weathered metal and whispered the only explanation that made sense to her. This must have been humanity's last prayer. Serenia remained motionless beside the little radio until the final piano note dissolved into the quiet hum of aging electronics. Then, with a gentle click, the melody began again from the beginning. There was no audience left to hear it. No operator remained to maintain the transmitter. No visible power source should have survived 300 years of frozen winters and forgotten summers. Yet the tiny amber light continued to glow with calm determination, as though time itself had chosen to spare this single machine. She slowly opened her survey scanner and swept the room. The readings made even less sense than the broadcast. The radio consumed almost no measurable energy. A compact thermoelectric cell hidden beneath its metal casing was still producing enough current to sustain the receiver, drawing microscopic amounts of heat from the difference between the cold concrete floor and the warmer air trapped inside the building. It was an inelegant solution by modern standards, but undeniably human. Practical, resourceful, built to last longer than anyone expected. Serena carefully lifted the radio with both hands. The metal felt unexpectedly warm despite the 14-degree Fahrenheit air surrounding her. The edges had been polished smooth by years of ordinary use. Tiny scratches crossed the tuning dial, each one silently recording countless fingers searching for familiar voices. She imagined the final human who had held it. Perhaps an engineer waiting through another long maintenance shift. Perhaps a child listening beside a window while snow drifted outside. Perhaps a family refusing to let silence settle inside their home. None of the possibilities resembled military protocol. They resembled hope. She continued searching the communications room. Shelves overflowed with paper manuals whose pages had yellowed, but remained perfectly readable inside the dry climate. Coffee mugs rested beside obsolete computer terminals. A faded jacket still hung neatly beside the exit door. Whoever had worked here had not fled in panic. They had simply stopped returning. Her scanner finally located the origin of the broadcast. A thick copper cable disappeared beneath the floor, connecting the radio to an ancient transmission tower standing outside against the pale sky. Serena followed the line through a maintenance tunnel where frost covered every pipe like delicate crystal vines. The tunnel eventually opened into the tower's control chamber. Dust coated every console, yet one status light blinked with patient rhythm. She brushed away decades of powder from an engraved bronze plaque. Community broadcast station. Built by volunteers. Her translator paused before rendering the final sentence. Keeping each other company since 2089. Serena quietly repeated the words. Keeping each other company. Her people had never built communication systems for companionship. Their networks existed to exchange information, coordinate navigation, and preserve knowledge with flawless precision. Loneliness had never appeared in engineering specifications. Yet humanity had apparently devoted labor, resources, and precious electricity simply so strangers could feel less alone. She activated the station archives. Thousands of audio files appeared across the dusty display. Local weather updates, birthday dedications, lost pet announcements, charity events, school concerts, evening music hours, ordinary voices living ordinary lives. No declarations of glorious victory, no final speeches, no desperate farewell to the stars. Only neighbors speaking to neighbors across quiet distances. Serena looked down at the little radio resting safely in her arms. The melody began once more, softer than before, drifting through the abandoned station with gentle confidence. For the first time, uncertainty replaced her earlier conviction. If this was a prayer, it was unlike any prayer her civilization had ever known. And somewhere beneath the frozen colony, another faint signal quietly awakened, answering the song with a single rhythmic pulse. The rhythmic pulse beneath the frozen colony repeated exactly every 12 seconds. It was too regular to be geological and too stable to be random interference. Serena stood perfectly still inside the silent control chamber, watching the waveform rise across her scanner with unwavering precision. The old radio continued filling the room with gentle music while the mysterious signal answered from somewhere far below, as though two forgotten machines were patiently holding a conversation that had lasted for centuries. She secured the radio inside a padded field case before tracing the underground transmission through the station schematics. Most of the colony's infrastructure had collapsed from neglect, but one route remained highlighted in faint blue. Emergency. Maintenance access. Sublevel 4. The hatch leading downward resisted at first, its hydraulic seals stiff from decades without movement. With steady pressure, the mechanism finally released, sending a slow breath of cool air drifting upward from the darkness below. Her helmet lights illuminated a narrow staircase descending through reinforced concrete lined with insulated cables that still carried a faint electrical current. Every few yards another emergency lamp glowed dimly, powered by resilient systems that refused to surrender despite impossible odds. Humanity, she quietly realized, had never built anything expecting perfection. They built for tomorrow, even when tomorrow seemed uncertain. The deeper she traveled, the warmer the air became. Frost disappeared from the walls, replaced by condensation that reflected soft golden light across polished steel pipes. Her environmental display registered 39 degrees Fahrenheit, then 46, then 51. Somewhere beneath the colony, heat was still being generated. The pulse grew stronger until it became almost audible, not as a sound, but as a vibration gently resonating through the soles of her boots. She reached an enormous circular door marked with weathered lettering. Municipal Emergency Operations Center. The manual release wheel required several slow turns before ancient locking pins withdrew with a heavy metallic sigh. As the door opened, warm air carrying the faint scent of machine oil and old paper flowed into the corridor. Inside, rows of dormant computer consoles surrounded a central chamber where a compact fusion generator quietly maintained its endless vigil. It operated at only 3% capacity, yet every indicator remained within safe limits. Nearby, hydroponic trays sat empty beneath inactive grow lights, while shelves of carefully labeled supplies remained untouched behind transparent storage panels. No signs of panic appeared anywhere. Chairs were neatly arranged. Toolkits rested exactly where someone had placed them. Even a chessboard remained frozen in the middle of an unfinished game. Serenia slowly approached the generator controls. A single display remained active. System Priority 1. Life Support. System Priority 2. Emergency Communications. System Priority 3. Cryogenic Preservation. Another terminal beside it quietly displayed the colony's final operations log. Evacuation complete. Civilian transport fleet departed successfully. Essential maintenance personnel remaining by volunteer agreement. Final communications relay active. Serenia paused as the last entry appeared beneath the others. Last duty officer, Elias Carter. Upon confirmation that every civilian vessel had cleared the system, emergency protocol instructed the station intelligence to preserve its final engineer in cryogenic suspension until an authorized rescue mission or a verified interstellar visitor restored the communications network. Her heartbeat slowed. Cryogenic preservation. This had never been a forgotten survivor abandoned by his own people. He had been the last volunteer, remaining behind so every family escaping the colony would keep hearing a reassuring voice until the very last transport disappeared into the stars. She followed another illuminated cable through a short hallway until it ended before a reinforced chamber unlike anything else in the facility. Frost covered a thick observation window, but a steady internal light glowed behind the ice. She gently cleared the glass with her gloved hand. Inside rested a single cryogenic capsule surrounded by quiet medical equipment that still monitored its occupant with astonishing patience. The display above the chamber identified its resident in clear English letters that her translator immediately rendered. Elias Carter, Station Communications Engineer. Status: stable. Estimated revival upon authorized contact. Serenia forgot to breathe for a moment. Every historical record she had studied described this colony as abandoned beyond recovery. Yet one human had never truly left. He had chosen to stay until everyone else was safely gone. Trusting that one day someone would answer the final signal, he refused to let fall silent. Behind her, the little radio resting safely inside its case changed songs once again, and almost instantly the cryogenic monitor responded. A thin green line brightened across the display as the radio transmitted the station's dormant authorization handshake, awakening systems that had patiently waited through 3 centuries, one careful heartbeat at a time. The green indicator brightened one steady line at a time until the cryogenic chamber released a quiet mechanical hiss that echoed through the empty operations center. Warm vapor drifted across the observation window before slowly fading into the softly lit room. Serenia instinctively stepped closer, every lesson from the Galactic Academy telling her to wait for automated medical clearance. Yet curiosity anchored her feet in place. Inside the transparent capsule, the sleeping figure remained perfectly still for several long seconds. Then one finger moved. Another. A slow breath expanded his chest, as if the centuries between yesterday and today had been nothing more than a single night's rest. Diagnostic lights shifted from amber to blue. Heart rate normal. Neural activity stable. Environmental adaptation complete. Warm electrolyte solution flowed quietly through the medical lines as the chamber completed its final revival cycle. Automated diagnostics monitored circulation, muscle response, and cognitive function for another 30 seconds. Only after every indicator turned blue did the safety locks release. The capsule unlocked with a gentle click. Elias Carter opened his eyes. He stared at the ceiling without speaking, blinking several times as his vision adjusted to the unfamiliar brightness. His hair had grown only slightly during suspended animation, still a soft dark blonde touched with faint silver near the temples. His face carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems one careful step at a time rather than rushing toward impossible answers. He slowly sat upright, drawing a deep breath before looking around the room. His eyes paused on Serena for only a moment. She expected surprise, perhaps alarm. Instead, the first expression crossing his face was quiet confusion, as though one detail in the room felt strangely out of place. He tilted his head slightly and listened. Somewhere behind Serena, inside the protective field case, the little radio continued playing another warm melody through its aging speaker. Elias smiled with unmistakable relief. His first words were neither dramatic nor fearful. Did somebody finally fix the antenna? Serena stared at him in silence, uncertain whether her translator had misunderstood the sentence. After everything she had imagined, after centuries of isolation and impossible survival, the first concern of the last human on the colony was a radio transmitter. Elias carefully swung his legs over the side of the capsule and placed his feet on the warm metal floor. He rested one hand against the edge of the capsule for balance before taking his first careful step. His movements were slow but steady, guided more by habit than uncertainty. He glanced toward the generator room, then toward the maintenance corridor, mentally checking familiar landmarks exactly as though he had stepped away only yesterday. Finally, his attention returned to Serena. "I guess you are not with station maintenance," he said with a tired but friendly smile. "That uniform definitely is not from Earth." Serena found her voice at last. "My name is Serena. I am a star traveler with the Concord Survey Fleet. This colony has been considered abandoned for more than 300 years. Elias absorbed the statement without visible panic. He quietly nodded once, looking down at his own hands before lifting his eyes again. "Longer than I expected," he admitted softly. "The emergency schedule was never very optimistic." Serena carefully removed the radio from its protective case and placed it on a nearby table. The music filled the room once more. Elias laughed under his breath, a genuine sound that warmed the silent chamber more effectively than the fusion generator ever could. "There you are," he whispered toward the little machine. "You kept your promise." Every maintenance shift ended the same way. As long as that station kept playing, someone, somewhere, was still awake with you. Serena looked from the radio back to the human engineer. "I believe this music was humanity's final prayer," she confessed. Elias gently rested one hand on the scratched metal casing before shaking his head with quiet amusement. "No," he said. "This was just what we listened to while fixing broken things. Long nights, cold weather, stubborn equipment. Music helped the hours feel shorter." Serena lowered her gaze to the worn radio, suddenly realizing she had mistaken comfort for ceremony, companionship for ritual, and ordinary human kindness for something far more mysterious. Yet somehow the truth felt even more extraordinary. Elias moved through the operations center with the quiet confidence of someone returning to a familiar workshop after a long vacation instead of awakening centuries into the future. Every few steps he reached out almost instinctively, brushing dust from control panels, straightening a chair that had shifted only slightly, or checking indicator lights that had faithfully continued their routines without him. Serena followed in thoughtful silence, watching the strange relationship between the man and the machines surrounding him. They were not simply tools. They felt like old friends that had patiently waited for his return. He paused beside the compact fusion generator and rested his hand against its warm housing. "Still humming," he said with an appreciative smile. "You always were the reliable one." Serena studied the ancient equipment through fresh eyes. Her civilization replaced every major system after 20 years, believing efficiency demanded constant renewal. Humanity, she realized, had once designed machines to be repaired instead of discarded. The philosophy felt almost impossible. Elias noticed her thoughtful expression and smiled. "You were wondering why we kept fixing old things instead of building new ones." She nodded honestly. "Where I come from, replacing something is considered progress." Elias leaned against the generator housing, folding his arms comfortably. Sometimes it is. But sometimes fixing something reminds you why it mattered in the first place. The words settled gently inside the quiet room. They sounded less like engineering advice and more like a way of living. Serena glanced toward the little radio still playing another familiar melody across the operations center. Did everyone here listen to the same station? She asked. Elias chuckled softly. Most of us did. Weather updates in the morning. Local news around lunch. Music through the afternoon. Somebody always dedicated songs for birthdays, anniversaries, new babies, or neighbors working the late shift. He opened a storage cabinet and retrieved 2 insulated metal mugs that remained exactly where he had left them. One still contained a packet of freeze-dried coffee sealed inside protective wrapping. He held it for a moment before quietly placing it back on the shelf. The station made the colony feel smaller, he continued. When you heard familiar voices every day, you remembered you were not facing the cold by yourself. Serena walked toward the communications console, where archived broadcasts remained neatly cataloged. She selected one at random. A cheerful woman announced that the elementary school science fair had been postponed because heavy snowfall made the roads unsafe. A child laughed somewhere in the background before apologizing for interrupting the recording. Elias smiled before the message even finished. That would be Mrs. Donovan. She always forgot to close the studio door before her grandchildren visited. Another recording followed. A volunteer firefighter thanked local mechanics for repairing emergency vehicles without charging overtime. Then came a birthday greeting for an elderly music teacher celebrating her 75th year. None of the voices sounded extraordinary. None attempted to become legends. Yet each recording carried an unmistakable warmth that no historical archive had ever preserved. Serena slowly lowered her scanner. Your history books speak about human expansion, exploration, and conflict, she said quietly. They never mentioned any of this. Elias looked around the silent room with gentle eyes. History usually remembers the loudest moments, he replied. Real life is mostly made of quiet ones. Before Serena could answer, a soft notification chimed from the central console. One dormant communications relay after another began appearing online across the colony map. The radio had not merely survived. It had awakened something larger. Somewhere beyond the frozen streets, another forgotten transmitter answered with a steady pulse, followed by another, and then another, spreading across the abandoned settlement like neighbors slowly turning on porch lights after a very long night. The colony map continued filling with soft blue lights until nearly every district glowed once again, not because people had returned, but because forgotten transmitters were recognizing one another across silent streets. Elias leaned over the communications console, studying the growing network with quiet satisfaction. They are waking up in sequence, he said. The stations were designed to check on each other every few hours. If one came back online, the others would answer automatically. Serena watched dozens of tiny signals ripple outward like circles spreading across the surface of a still lake. Her scanner estimated that some broadcasts had traveled more than 400 miles through buried relay lines before reaching isolated repeater towers scattered across the frozen landscape. Your engineers expected entire cities to lose power, she observed. Elias smiled. We expected storms, accidents, equipment failures, and bad luck. We always assumed something would eventually break. That is why we built ways to help each other recover. He slipped into a weathered maintenance jacket hanging beside the control room door. The fabric looked ordinary, faded from years of honest work rather than ceremony, yet he buttoned it with unmistakable affection. Serena carried the old radio beside him as they climbed back toward the surface. Outside, the gray afternoon sky reflected across untouched snow while the abandoned colony rested in peaceful silence. Yet that silence no longer felt empty. Beneath it flowed invisible conversations between towers that had refused to forget one another. Elias led her along a narrow street lined with modest homes whose windows still displayed faded curtains and carefully arranged flower pots turned brittle with age. He stopped beside a small neighborhood park where a weathered wooden bench faced a frozen pond. Every Friday evening, he said, the station played requests from anyone working late. Mechanics, nurses, teachers, delivery drivers. People called in to dedicate songs to someone they cared about. Serena looked across the quiet park, and everyone listened. Not always, Elias answered with a soft laugh. Sometimes the children wanted cartoons instead. Sometimes teenagers complained about the music. Sometimes people forgot the radio was even playing. But somehow they always knew it was there. They continued walking until they reached another communications mast rising above the rooftops. Its red warning beacon blinked steadily against the gathering dusk. Elias opened a maintenance panel and adjusted one aging relay by hand. The radio immediately produced a clearer, brighter sound. Serena glanced at her portable receiver in surprise. New broadcasts were appearing from beyond the colony itself. One station transmitted from a mining outpost hundreds of miles away. Another originated from an orbital weather satellite still circling faithfully overhead. Then another signal emerged from a distant moon that had once served as a transportation hub. "That is impossible," she whispered. "Those settlements were abandoned as well." Elias folded the small screwdriver back into his pocket. Radio waves do not care whether someone is listening. If the equipment survives, the signal keeps traveling. Serena slowly expanded the scan radius. Her display filled with faint analog broadcasts scattered across neighboring systems, each carrying music, community announcements, or simple recorded voices preserved inside forgotten repeaters. Thousands of human transmitters had continued speaking into the darkness long after the people themselves had disappeared from history. She had spent years studying civilizations through monuments, treaties, and military records, yet none of them had ever left behind anything like this. Humanity had scattered companionship itself among the stars. As the evening light faded into a field of brilliant constellations, the little radio resting in Serena's hands shifted to another familiar melody. This time, however, it was no longer singing alone. Countless distant stations quietly joined the chorus, each separated by unimaginable distances, yet somehow answering one another with perfect patience, as though an entire civilization was still gently reminding the universe that no traveler should ever have to feel alone. When they returned to the operations center, every communications console had awakened. Soft indicator lights stretched across the circular room like a constellation brought down to Earth, each one blinking with calm purpose instead of urgency. Serena carefully placed the old radio beside the central terminal while Elias settled into the worn operator's chair. The leather creaked exactly as it had centuries before, and for a brief moment the room no longer felt abandoned. It felt occupied. He rested his fingertips on the console and smiled. "Good to see you still remember me." A gentle electronic tone answered almost immediately. The main display illuminated with clean white text. "Authorized communications engineer identified. Welcome back, Elias Carter." Serena watched in fascination as forgotten systems accepted the greeting without hesitation. Time had erased governments, trade routes, and generations of history, yet one simple identity remained valid. Another message appeared. Long-duration preservation complete. Archive integrity 99.8%. Preparing historical continuity protocol. Elias leaned forward slightly. "Historical continuity?" he whispered. "I do not remember installing that." Before either of them could investigate further, hidden projectors awakened around the chamber. A calm artificial voice filled the room, neither cold nor emotional, simply patient. "If this message has been activated, civilization has experienced an interruption beyond projected recovery models. Primary objective has shifted from infrastructure preservation to cultural preservation." Serena exchanged a quiet glance with Elias. The voice continued. "Cities may be rebuilt. Technology may be rediscovered. Languages may evolve. However, ordinary human life must not be forgotten." Thousands of archived recordings instantly appeared across the surrounding displays. Children laughing during science fairs. Amateur musicians performing in neighborhood parks. Local baseball games announced over. Community radio. Holiday concerts. Weather warnings followed by reassuring voices reminding everyone to stay warm and check on elderly neighbors. Farmers discussing rainfall. Teachers congratulating graduating students. Volunteer mechanics offering free repairs after severe storms. None of it resembled official history. Every recording captured an ordinary moment that history books rarely preserved. Serena felt an unfamiliar weight settle gently inside her thoughts. "Your archives protected daily life," she said quietly. Elias nodded without taking his eyes off the displays. Somebody must have realized that future generations would already know about our biggest victories and biggest failures. They wanted someone to remember everything in between. The artificial intelligence resumed speaking. Human identity is not defined solely by scientific achievement or political leadership. Human identity is sustained through shared memory, music, humor, compassion, and everyday kindness. Therefore, cultural broadcasts remain active until received by another listening civilization. The room fell completely silent except for the soft melody flowing from the old radio. Serenia suddenly understood why every forgotten transmitter had continued broadcasting through empty worlds. They had never been waiting for humanity to return. They had been waiting for someone else to arrive. Someone willing to listen. Her scanner chimed unexpectedly. A secure transmission from the Concorde survey fleet had reached her orbiting vessel. Automated protocol recommended immediate archival compression before the aging network deteriorated beyond recovery. One command would preserve only essential technical information and permanently discard what the system classified as low-priority audio files. Serenia stared at the notification without moving. To the Concorde, millions of songs, conversations, birthday greetings, and quiet evenings meant almost nothing compared to engineering data. Elias noticed the expression on her face, but did not ask what she had received. Instead, he gently adjusted the tuning dial on the old radio until another familiar voice drifted into the room. "Good evening, neighbors," the recording said warmly. "If you are working the night shift, remember there is always someone awake with you." Serenia slowly lowered her hand away from the deletion command, realizing that if those voices disappeared now, the universe would never hear them again. Serenia opened the communications panel on her wrist and dismissed the automated recommendation without hesitation. The confirmation light faded from red to blue, and for the first time since joining the Concorde survey fleet, she deliberately chose memory over efficiency. The ancient artificial intelligence acknowledged her decision with a soft chime that blended almost perfectly with the music flowing from the old radio. "External listener confirmed," the calm voice announced. "Historical continuity protocol advancing to final phase." Elias looked up from the console, his expression thoughtful rather than surprised. "Somebody expected this day," he said quietly. "They knew eventually another civilization would find us." Across the circular chamber, hidden transmitters began awakening one after another. Frequency tables expanded across every display until the entire wall became a living map of forgotten human settlements stretching far beyond the frozen colony. Orbiting stations, mining outposts, agricultural domes, research observatories, weather satellites. Every surviving relay synchronized itself with remarkable precision despite centuries of isolation. Serenia watched the network stabilize as if invisible hands were reconnecting neighbors separated not by streets anymore, but by entire star systems. The artificial intelligence continued speaking in the same patient voice. Emergency communication network transitioning from local operation to heritage broadcast. Original mission complete. Secondary mission begins. Elias frowned slightly. Secondary mission? The answer arrived almost immediately. To ensure no civilization mistakes survival for the greatest human achievement. The lights dimmed throughout the operations center. The little radio remained the brightest object in the room, its warm amber indicator glowing gently against the surrounding darkness. Then another melody began, softer than the previous songs. A simple acoustic guitar, a quiet piano, voices singing together without perfect harmony, yet somehow sounding more beautiful because of it. Simultaneously, every relay shown on the colony map transmitted the same recording. Serenia's scanner expanded automatically, tracking the signal as it leaped from antenna to satellite, from satellite to orbital beacon, from beacon to deep space repeaters that had patiently maintained their positions for generations. The broadcast spread outward at the speed of light, crossing silent systems where no human footsteps remained. She imagined lonely cargo pilots hearing unfamiliar music during routine flights. Scientists working late inside remote laboratories pausing to listen. Explorers charting empty sectors suddenly discovering gentle voices carried from a civilization they believed had vanished forever. Elias closed his eyes for a few moments, recognizing the melody immediately. "Community choir," he whispered with a quiet smile. Every winter they invited anyone who wanted to sing. Nobody cared whether you could carry a tune. Serena listened carefully. She could hear older voices blending beside younger ones. Children laughing between verses. Someone beginning half a beat too early before everyone else joined with encouraging laughter instead of embarrassment. Nothing about the recording sounded polished. Everything about it sounded alive. The artificial intelligence spoke one final time above the fading music. If you are hearing this, then humanity succeeded. Not because we endured forever, but because someone still chose to listen. Silence followed, gentle rather than empty. One by one, the archived systems completed their final synchronization and transferred complete cultural libraries into Serena's survey vessel orbiting high above the colony. Engineering manuals traveled alongside lullabies. Scientific journals beside school concerts. Navigation charts beside birthday messages recorded decades apart. The database refused to separate technical knowledge from ordinary life because, in the eyes of its creators, they had always belonged together. Serena rested one hand lightly upon the weathered radio, no longer seeing an old machine. She was holding the heartbeat of a civilization that had discovered the simplest way to outlive time. They had not built the loudest monument among the stars. They had built the quietest one. Several months later, after the Concord Historical Council had reviewed millions of recovered broadcasts, personal recordings, engineering logs, and cultural archives from the forgotten human network, the Grand Hall of Living Civilizations stood quieter than it had at any moment in recorded Concord history. Representatives from hundreds of worlds had gathered beneath its soaring crystal dome, expecting another presentation of recovered technology from an extinct species. Instead, Serena walked into the chamber carrying nothing more impressive than a scratched metal radio with a faded tuning dial and a warm amber light that still refused to fade. Behind her, Elias Carter entered slowly, wearing a simple dark jacket instead of ceremonial robes. He had declined every formal title the Concord had offered him. Historical advisor, cultural ambassador, honorary chancellor. He accepted none of them. "I was just the station engineer," he had said with an embarrassed smile. There were millions of people whose voices mattered every bit as much as mine. The council requested the technical archive first. Reactor designs, navigation algorithms, structural engineering. Enough scientific knowledge to influence generations of research. Serena surprised the entire chamber by placing those files second on the agenda. She gently rested the little radio upon the central podium instead. Several delegates exchanged puzzled glances. One finally asked, "Is this artifact truly more significant than humanity's technological achievements?" Serena looked toward Elias before answering. "No, it explains why those achievements existed." She reached forward and turned the worn mechanical dial. Static whispered softly through the hall before yielding to the same familiar melody that had first greeted her inside the abandoned colony. The enormous chamber remained perfectly silent. No translation accompanied the lyrics. None was necessary. The music carried something language never fully could. Warmth, patience, home. Then another recording followed. A child proudly announcing the winner of a neighborhood science fair. An elderly woman thanking strangers for clearing snow from her driveway. A local mechanic reminding everyone to drive carefully because freezing rain had arrived earlier than expected. Soft laughter drifted between ordinary conversations. Nobody rushed to speak over anyone else. Nobody tried to become unforgettable. They simply sounded like people choosing one another every ordinary day. For weeks the council had listened to thousands of similar recordings, expecting to discover military codes, political propaganda, or hidden strategic value. Instead, they found birthdays, weather reports, bedtime songs, volunteer announcements, and neighbors reminding one another to drive safely through winter storms. Slowly, the debate inside the Concord changed. The question was no longer whether these recordings deserved preservation. The question became how many other civilizations had unknowingly lost the ordinary moments that truly defined them. Serena finally understood why her first conclusion had been wrong. She stepped beside the podium and spoke quietly enough that every word seemed to belong to the music rather than interrupt it. "When I first found this radio, I believed these songs were humanity's last prayer. I believed they were saying farewell before disappearing into history." She paused, resting one hand upon the weathered metal. "I was mistaken. She smiled toward Elias. These were never prayers asking to be saved. They were invitations asking no one to face the darkness alone. The chamber remained silent long after the recording ended. Then the High Archivist slowly rose to his feet. One after another, every delegate throughout the hall stood with him in complete silence. The vote that followed was unanimous. From that day forward, every civilization entering the Galactic Archive would preserve not only its inventions and governments, but also its music, neighborhood broadcasts, family traditions, school performances, and ordinary voices. Official records would no longer remember only how civilizations survived. They would remember how they lived. That evening, Serenia returned alone to the observation deck overlooking the stars. Beside her, the old radio quietly played another familiar song, while thousands of newly restored human broadcasts traveled once more across the galaxy. In distant stations, research ships, mining colonies, hospitals, and lonely observatories, travelers paused to listen without knowing why the melodies felt comforting. Serenia gazed into the endless night and finally understood what humanity had truly left behind. Not their last prayer, but their first greeting to anyone who arrived after them. The amber light on the little radio reflected in her golden eyes, and for the first time in Concord history, an entire civilization measured progress not only by the stars it reached, but by the voices it chose never to forget.